Hi, this is Bob Samuels, founder of TechConnectr. TechConnectr is a transparent marketplace and campaign management platform of best-of-breed B2B lead generation solutions. We've partnered with Serious Decisions and the B2B MX to bring you wisdom from leading account-based marketing thought leaders. To that end, I would like to introduce you to Matt Heinz, president of Heinz Marketing and one of the smartest marketers I know. Matt, it's a pleasure to speak with you. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great, man. How are you?
Excellent. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful time of year. Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Hope the New Year is working for you.
So far, so good. I can't believe we're already, as we record this, it's already late January. I feel like we were just watching the Rose Bowl, and here we are already, bumping up against Valentine's Day. It's nuts.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So ABM's still a hot topic. The coordination between sales and marketing is really interesting to me, and people overlook it. They either take it for granted or they think they can't influence it, but it's got to be a huge part of the whole determination of whether the project's going to be successful or not.
Well, it certainly comes up a lot. I mean, I think, we've gotten to the point now where everybody is talking about ABM, whether they understand what it is or not. And people have different ranges of definitions for what it is. Some people have very narrow definitions. Some people basically just apply ABM to anything that has to do with enterprise marketing, But I think that I've always thought that if you're doing sales and marketing together well, when you're doing named account marketing well, it includes a far greater level of integration between sales and marketing at every stage of the pipeline, not just when leads are handed off or not just when you're supporting, the sales process from a sales enablement standpoint. It also includes a much more active consideration of the buying committee, right? Which means not just knowing who those members of the buying committee are, but managing them separately, communicating with them, with segmented messages, but then understanding where are the cohorts within those buying committees, where are the groups of people that either agree already or don't agree, but you need as a seller need to build consensus amongst them. And that is a difficult thing to do and to execute, but that is a key part of where a lot of companies are seeing very significant increases in results, both velocity of deals as well as conversion rates of named accounts when they're doing it well.
Excellent. So by the way, before I go too far, I forgot I didn't introduce you as well as I should have. So can you give me a little bit of give our audience a little bit of background about who you are, where you've been, what perspective you come from with this whole coordination and ABM and so forth?
Sure. So I'm Matt Heinz, started Heinz Marketing a little over 11 years ago. And, we focus purely on helping B2B companies build more predictable, scalable pipelines. So we work with marketing organizations to think about how am I going to deliver revenue impact for the organization, do that in a consistent way, do that in a profitable way, and do that in a way that can scale as the needs and goals of the organization grow as well.
Beautiful. So getting back to what you were saying before about coordination. So it seems like I'm picturing in a bow tie sort of a picture where there's a lot of people that need to be coordinated with on your client side, including the sales and marketing and all of the key stakeholders there. And then there's key stakeholders on their prospect side. There's lots of them too.
Yeah. And I think that, oftentimes, we build lists of targets for, our target organizations, and we just throw them into campaigns and treat them as individuals. Right. And so you'll have this named account you're trying to reach, and you'll have maybe 6-7 people there, and you're sending them the same message, and you're not doing anything to coordinate behavior across all of them. So first of all, if you're talking to a CFO versus a CTO versus, potentially a system analyst, right, someone further down the organization, they all work for the same company. They may all ultimately agree that they need your solution to solve something, but they're very different in terms of their approaches. They're different in terms of the problems they solve, or problems that they're addressing at least. So having a segmented way of talking to them is first and foremost, but I think also understanding how to communicate amongst those cohorts of people within that organization is critical. And thinking about like what they have in common, thinking about the message you're going to put in front of them that relates to all of them, and then execution around that. How are you going to execute in a way that actually gets them to talk to each other about that topic? Again, easier said than done, but super important.
So I was going to ask you, as far as reaching out to the prospects, do you recommend going real high, going real low? and between all of the above, I guess it's not an or thing. It's really a whole coordinated effort.
It really is. I mean, I think, in many cases, you'll have people lower in the organization that not only feel more acutely the pain of what's wrong or the pain of what's not working, but in most organizations, it isn't, it may be the CTO that is making the final decision, but she's usually looking to her team to go and bring her ideas, to bring her solutions, to identify the problem and then identify solutions. So, a lot of people say, well, if you're selling into enterprise, you need to start at the top and find the most important person. Well, that eventually you need to be able to have that conversation, but you may actually build internal momentum and consensus by starting with people that will actually pick up the phone, people that will actually reply to your email, and people actually who acutely feel the problem that you can potentially solve.
Right. So I guess really the goal is going to be to try to get someone who will be a champion, and odds are it's going to be down low. But if you've got someone up top that can be a champion, that's pretty cool.
Well, and every organization you're selling into is going to have a different culture, right? I mean, some are going to be very deferential to people that are higher than they are. Every organization you sell into is going to have its own politics. It's going to have someone, there may be someone junior in the organization who just, quite frankly, is not C-level material, but's been in the company for 20 years and everybody listens to because they know where all the skeletons are buried. And so, I mean, as a seller, first you have to understand like whether or not that company has a big enough problem to solve, right? Just because they're in healthcare and just because you sell a healthcare solution doesn't mean every healthcare company is your prospect. So understanding the context into which you are selling, the attributes and characteristics of a company that needs you, that's really important as a starting point. But then to find, to your point, to find that champion, to find that person that's willing to not only tell you how decisions are made and how buying happens in the organization, but also guide you to the other people that are going to be key to the buying committee to build consensus. I mean, you can call an email all day long, just, like blunt force trauma, head against the wall, or you can find whoever that is in the organization who's willing to do that for you. One of the members of the buying committee that many people ignore or don't even think about with enterprise is, the executive assistant for a decision maker. A lot of people treat the executive assistant as a gatekeeper, but oftentimes he or she is actually a catalyst. Like their job is to be a gatekeeper of the distractions to that individual. And if you're coming with something that actually solves a core problem, you can have them be the champion. You can have them be the hero of bringing a great idea back to their boss.
Very good. So what you brought up a good point about they have to have a problem that you're going to be able to solve. And how can you figure out if they have the problem? What kind of problem they have?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, I mean, you can certainly ask. Two, I think if there are sometimes external signs or signals or trigger events that indicate that someone is exploring something, let's use account-based marketing as an example, right? I mean, oftentimes, I've got alerts set up in LinkedIn that tell me when anyone on LinkedIn in particular filters joins an ABM group on LinkedIn. Now, ABM LinkedIn groups, I don't think are very well managed, as they're not great tools to participate in. But if someone joins an ABM group, that is a sign that they're thinking about ABM. That's a sign that somehow they're either starting it or thinking about it or getting into it and want support from others. So that's a signal that I can key in on, right? If someone says it joins that group, I can say, wow, here's a workbook we put together to help people get started on ABM, or here's a blog post highlighting reasons why many ABM programs stall or fail, right? So I can go back and I can engage people with something of interest. And not everyone is going to be, in that context, but I think you're going to find a lot more efficiency and a lot higher conversion rate when you can use those kind of trigger events.
I think it's brilliant, and also gives you something to talk about. At least they know ABM, and then the context of the article and the group or whatever gives you more specifics of something to talk about.
Yep.
Brilliant. As far as, so some of the things that came up since we last talked. So GDPR is a big thing that people have to deal with. It's something that's required. CCPA, California and Boston and so forth, or Massachusetts are all coming on board too. What are you seeing as far as the challenges or things that marketers need to be careful of?
Well, I think for two things. One, I think this just reinforces why it's important for any company, any brand to really invest in the technology stack behind their marketing programs. I mean, you can no longer get away with just having, good emails and good value-added practices without integrating your system so you have sort of one common view of the customer and prospect. I mean, that is just now it's gone from being a good best practice to being table stakes if you don't want to get sued, right? But I think that what's great about GDPR and CCPA is that these are not in conflict with just the way you should be treating your customers at all in the first place, right? Yes, it's going to require some work to get up to that level because our systems, maybe in general, in out of the box, don't necessarily talk to each other, but if you are creating value for your prospects, if you're creating value and respecting the time and sort of interest of your prospects, these regulations should not be a problem. They're just reinforcing and separating you with your good practices from those that really don't want to bother with good practices. So I think overall it's a very good thing. I think overall it's going to increase engagement rates from the prospects that matter, for the prospects that want to hear from you, and that's going to be a benefit to companies that embrace it.
Beautiful. So it's not just a necessary evil; it's actually something that's useful. It helps weed out some of the bad players, and it helps you get in front of people that really are interested in hearing your message, which is all you want anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Makes sense, and it makes sense from both sides because everybody's a consumer too, and you can appreciate the controls there. So what have you seen? And I think we spoke I don't know how many months ago, but what's hot out there? What are you seeing that's interesting as far as methods, as far as people, as far as technology?
Well, I think we're finally getting to a point where AI is becoming sort of more practical for, an early adopter marketer. I think the idea of using artificial intelligence to identify signals has been around for a while, but I think we're now finally getting that to land where you can say, okay, if I see this signal, here's how it gets integrated into my systems. Here's where it tells me what to do next. So I feel like artificial intelligence is going to play a really big role for marketers over the next, 12 to 24 months as a means of focusing on quality versus quantity, doing less of sending every email to everybody and hoping someone responds, and more getting the right email to the right person at the right time, and not having to manually set all of that up and do the manual segmentation. The other piece that doesn't require technology at all is just a greater alignment between sales and marketing. I think that, historically we've seen the sales funnel split horizontally through the middle, where marketing owns the top of the funnel and sales owns the bottom, and just, leads get thrown over the wall and collateral occasionally. I think the most successful, the most efficient sales and marketing teams today look at that funnel and actually split it vertically with a diagonal bent, where marketing owns maybe the majority of the top of the funnel, sales may own the majority of the bottom, but there are roles and responsibilities for both groups at every stage. And so instead of having sort of disjointed strategies and overlap of responsibilities in the middle, you have a more integrated, a more thoughtful approach to prospects that creates consistency of the message they're seeing at the right place in the buying journey. And so especially when you're doing those named account selling, especially in that ABM kind of context, right, to be able to drive that kind of integration is just critical. And to make even the further point around that, when you've got a marketing organization that isn't defining its value based on the number of form fills they get, but defining its value based on what kind of marketing influence can happen on closed deals. I've seen some companies where, they're focused on such small segments of the market, the marketing team focuses more of their energy on sales enablement than they do lead gen. Like, lead gen is a secondary goal to, influencing deal velocity and conversion rate. And so that may be an extreme example, but I think that mentality, especially coming from marketing, but for sales and marketing teams working together, is really critical.
So when you say sales enablement, what do you mean by that? I mean, to me, everybody's either in sales or in sales enablement.
Sure. I mean, in a broad definition, you could say, well, if I'm generating leads, that's enabling sales to do their thing. And so, sure, I look at sales enablement and I think, what am I doing to increase the efficiency of my sales organization? And what am I doing to increase the efficacy of my sales organization? So put another way, what percent of my sales team's time is spent actively selling? What am I doing to put, process and content and tools in front of my sales team to help them spend more time selling? And then in that time they are selling, what am I doing to make sure they are as effective as possible, right? And to make sure that they're not just, hey, I'm actively selling, but I'm selling to the wrong person. I'm selling with the wrong message. I don't have a good follow-up to maintain the momentum that I had from the trade show last week. So, sales enablement can mean a lot of things. And I think you could clearly put a lot of marketing's activity in terms of driving pipeline into that bucket. So maybe it becomes so large of a definition that's not really very useful. So instead of that, I would just say, listen, as a marketer, what are you doing? Where are you focusing that has an end game of a result you can buy a beer with, right? Because if all you're doing is focusing on lead volume for lead volume's sake, if all you're doing is creating web traffic, hoping that converts into sales or leads somewhere, that's not as effective, as efficient as you can be.
Right. So the helping the sales enablement could be in terms of having some sales materials, some training, maybe, maybe getting, like you said, getting the right leads in there, that the focused leads that the salespeople can target and so forth. So whatever it takes.
Yep.
To help them be more efficient and more effective. And it seems to make sense that marketing should report to sales.
You think so?
I mean, they have the same goal at the end of the day, I would hope. And it just seems to make sense.
Well, I could argue that, there are segments of the finance team whose goal is to facilitate sales. So like a procurement department or a legal department who's reviewing contracts is certainly there to support the sales goal as well, but they don't necessarily report it to sales. I think the reporting structure, things like having service level agreements between sales and marketing, like those become forcing functions when you don't already have the culture that needs to exist to drive results. So if you've got a CMO that understands that revenue outcome is what's most important, right? And it doesn't mean that sales is subservient to marketing or vice versa. It just means we're all in it for the same reasons. And so, if we're saying, well, then all these groups need to report to sales, what we're really doing is we're saying, well, because sales is there when the deal gets signed, then they own everything. And that's not true. So I think that more important than org structure, more important than having legal contracts between departments, is having the culture in place that already supports a revenue-centric environment that allows people to put their egos aside, that in many cases, sort of allows you to take the idea of attribution and saying, like, let's ignore attribution for a minute. Let's assume that all of these deals are going to require sales and marketing to get done. That we don't really care if, sales swooped in at the last minute and got the deal done. We don't really care that, marketing provided 40% or 45% attribution on the deal. Get the deal done. And it's going to take all of us to do it.
Right. And to your point about keeping them separate, they are separate skill sets.
Yeah. And I think that's where, I think when sometimes you see, inside sales teams reporting into marketing and marketing considering a BDR function as a lead development function, like theoretically, that's a really good idea. In practice, you now have marketers managing salespeople, and that is a very different management skill. You now have a sales team that is no longer part of the sales organization, that is no longer has a direct implicit career path, that may not be getting the sales training that they should be if they weren't part of the sales team. So that idea breaks down. And so if I don't have to own, as a marketer, I don't have to own the BDR team or this inside sales team if I've got agreement with sales on what is a good lead. And when we generate a good lead, what does that mean? And when do the BDRs follow up with it? And how do they follow up with that? I mean, that's not something you're going to solve with a 30-minute meeting. It's not something you're going to solve by writing up a playbook and handing it off to your sales team and saying, please follow this. So there's a huge cultural element to making that work. And I don't think short-term things like, SLAs or, well, we'll just have marketing own the team are in the long-term interest of most companies.
Right. So the key, like you said, the goals need to be things that you can buy a beer with. So you can't buy a beer with a sales opportunity, although that's as far as you can go as far as marketing goes.
No, I think marketing, I've seen organizations where let's say it's the last week of the quarter and marketing is or the sales team is just grinding it out, trying to close deals. And let's say there's one deal that's going to make or break the quarter, like it's the last few days of the quarter. It's this one deal that's so close. And you got one member of the buying committee who just isn't quite comfortable yet saying yes. So why wouldn't marketing be willing to step back and create content for an audience of one in that context? Right? Like the most inefficient thing you could do as a traditional content marketer who's all about clicks and impressions and views. What if you got viewership for one person and that message customized to them got the deal done? Like that may be one of the most efficient things marketing can do, at least in that day or that week. So I think marketing can have an impact through the entire funnel. And we're not even talking about customer success here, right? Like, and I think, you could argue in a mature company, sales is a lagging indicator of great customer success. So what are we doing as marketers to leverage that, right? To increase leads, to increase referrals, to increase throughput, to help justify the decisioning, increase confidence from those late stage prospects that they're making a good decision.
That's a good point. And like you said, the customers and the land and expand and the growing those. I keep forgetting about that, but that's even more efficient, more effective needs there. So the one-to-one marketing, I would think would fall into sales, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
No. I think, you look at these enterprise deals and, before, I mean, we tend to think about sales process, and you think about your big complex deal, and the first stage is something around loosening the status quo, or, qualifying the problem, or helping to help the prospect understand the problem they do or don't know that they have. That may be the first official part of the buying process. But if that's stage one, then stage 0 is just getting their attention, right? It's just getting their attention and earning some level of engagement. And that could just be based on content. That could be based on the fact that I invited you to, a cocktail reception at the industry conference next month, where we didn't talk about work, but you just got to know us. And so now we're not just a name and an anonymous email. Now we're a guy that, we're two guys that like college football, And so I think that there's a whole level of support that initial engagement can have that can be sales driven. And then you have according to Gartner, only 3 to 4% of companies in any industry are actively buying. 46% are poised. 50% aren't worth your time at all. So by the math, if you get a room of prospects together, most of them are not going to be ready to buy. So the sales team may actually sort of work on warming up the relationship. That lead may then be nurtured by marketing for a period of time until they're actively ready to buy again. So I think this is another reason why I think that integration between sales and marketing at every stage, especially for more complex sales, is so important.
So there's no one specific handoff. There's a back and forth potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be so much easier. Look, if we could actually manage leads in a linear, one-directional way, that would be easier. If B2B buyers would actually make decisions based on purely business and logical reasons, this would all be easier. But the world is way messier than that.
Right. There's no one little flow there, and one person making the buying decision and everything. It's a whole complex thing. But I would think you'd still need to have, you need to have sales, which is the only thing you buy a beer with, as a goal for marketing. But you need interim stuff too, right? You need to somehow have measurements and rewards, I would think, for all those important things along the way that lead to a sale, especially with the long, 6-12 month sales cycle.
Yeah, no, I think there's a difference between measuring marketing's impact on revenue and measuring how effective the marketing is in that point in time, right? So I think, if you can separate, for example, your functional dashboard from your impact dashboard, if you're using email, for example, as a component of your marketing, like getting better open rates and click rates is important. If you're going to use the channel, might as well make it more effective. But if you go to the board meeting and you report on opens and clicks of emails, they're going to think that's what you prioritize. I think that's what you care about. So there's a time and a place for all those metrics. Like, you're absolutely right. Like, you still have to make your marketing better. But I would argue that those metrics tend to be more of an inside the marketing team scorecard versus something you want to take to the management team meeting versus you want to take to the board meeting.
Yep, that's well taken. What are you seeing as far as lead generation efforts, as far as getting the top of the funnel filled with net new names? Is that something you're coming across?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's still, for a lot of companies, that's still a huge part of their marketing efforts. I think that it is still important though, even though you could consider like, getting someone aware of your business or getting them to even sort of download a white paper. Two things to keep in mind. It's not just about sending out emails or like point in time random acts of marketing. To get to a lead, to get to a warm lead, someone that will respond to you, it's usually not an email or a search ad. It's usually still a body of work that you're putting in front of someone to get them willing to engage. And then once you engage, how you follow up with that is critical. If you generate a white paper lead, which may not be someone that's sales ready, but at least like there's probably a reason why they were interested in that white paper. If your sales team follows up and says, well, thanks for downloading the white paper, would you like to see a demo? Like that's not going to get a very good response. But if you have a sales team that's willing to say like, why did you download that white paper? What about that is interesting? Like what's going on in your business that made that prescient right now? That's a much more interesting conversation to have. So yeah, I mean, generating leads is a critical part of most organizations we work with. But if you treat that just as, well, let's send out emails and get people to fill out forms, that usually is not something that is very sustainable.
So it should be more than just a single kind of a outreach, but more of a whole story to tell. Absolutely. And a whole flow or a whole moving people along the process, I guess.
You got it.
So, and at least in my world, you can get lots of different flavors of lead gen. You can get just data, which is just people that are the right company size, industry, job function, geo, whatever. And then you've got your MQLs, which are people that have raised their hand that, like you said, have shown some interest in the topic. They're not necessarily interested in your product or your company, but the topic's of interest. So that's a start. And then deeper in the funnel, where there's some more verification that they have a pain maybe, and they're the right person, and maybe it's the right timing. So each time you go deeper in the funnel with more specifics, including, are you the right person? Do you have a project now? Within how much time? Each point is more expensive. And so is it worthwhile, or do you spend less money and get the volume and work people through yourself? Different ways to cut it, I guess.
There is. And I mean, one of the things you sort of bring up there is that, I think traditionally we think of a lead as someone that filled out a form, someone that requested something. Why couldn't a lead be someone that you observe has a need that you can follow up on? I gave the example earlier about people that joined the ABM groups, right? I don't have to wait for them to fill out a form for me to engage with them. Like I could reach out and say, hey, you look like someone who's interested in ABM. Can I offer you something that might help you along the way, right? I think it's especially important if you're going to use that strategy, that you've got something of value, that you've got something that people might otherwise have paid for, right? To be able to sort of, get them engaged. Because if you call and say, hey, I saw you were on ABM, group page. I'd like to sell you some ABM software, right? I mean, that's creepy in any context, I think. But I think if you can find people that have interest, find people based on those trigger events and buying signals elsewhere, you can get a solid stream of leads without worrying about people filling out forms.
It sounds like you're one of those old school people that likes to be able to give people something of value before you ask them for business.
It's a dying art, Bob, but it's super important. I think, when we work with inside sales teams, oftentimes I will say, okay, like let's assume that there are two rules. And I want you to these may or may not be your rules, but I want you to think about what you would do differently than what you're doing today if they were in fact true. The first one is the first conversation you have with the prospect, you're not allowed to talk about your product or service. You can't talk about your company or what you sell. And if they ask a direct question, then fine, you can answer it. But otherwise, if those things were off the table, what would you talk about? What questions would you ask? Like, what would you do in that conversation? And secondarily, when the prospect hangs up the phone after that first call, what did you share? What did you offer? What did you give them that got them to lean back in their chair and say, wow, that was really great. I would have paid for that. I would have paid for that information or that insight. And I would spend more time with this company or this individual the next time they call or the next time I have a need, because I believe I'd get something else valuable again.
Yeah, that's quite a bit different than what I see where you've only got 30 seconds, 45 seconds to be able to make your pitch, and you spew as much as you can about the company and product as possible and hope something sticks.
Well, look, I mean, if you do enough volume, if you make enough calls, if you do enough activity, you're going to find some prospects. But worst case, you run the risk of going scorched earth and creating such a bad reputation with all the rest of the prospects that they won't talk to you the next time. But I think also you don't have to share everything in the first message. I mean, like, just because you've got someone's attention doesn't mean you have to tell them the whole story. Let's assume your elevator ride is not 90 stories tall. Let's assume it's 2. Let's assume they're just going to the next level. What are you going to say that gets them to say, walk with me and tell me more? Like, it's not about the whole story. It's about the beginning of the story. It's earning someone's attention. That's why I mentioned before, like, this is not about your one chance. This is a body of work. What you share now has to compel the prospect to want to spend more time with you later today, tomorrow, next week, next month. And the more clearly you can articulate your connection and your insights and your content with problems they have, with them being able to see the impact that can have for themselves in their work or as their business, the more they're going to prioritize spending time with you.
So it's really the first contact is really enabling that second contact to happen. And
Sure.
That's when you have the chance to get more detailed into your problem fixer solution.
Well, I've seen prospects, literally on the phone, and instead of when someone says, "Hey, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we've only got 5 minutes left." I've heard prospects, with clients say, "No, this is not what I expected. This is really valuable. I'm canceling my next meeting because I want to keep going." Right. So, look, we've all got the same amount of time every day, and whether sometimes some of us are more intentional than not, but we're prioritizing what's in front of us. We're prioritizing what's going to make us smarter and better. And so if you think your next call is better than spending more time with someone learning about a problem, then you're going to take that call. But if you all of a sudden realize, this is why we talk about this as sort of the challenging or the loosening of the status quo. If you realize after 25 minutes that you actually have a problem you didn't know that you had, or maybe you knew you had the problem, but you had not really quantified its urgency to be solved. Like, I've just introduced new information to you that you may actually want us to follow up with now.
Yeah. So that's the best compliment probably is, "Hey, I've got a little more time. Let's keep going."
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Beautiful. So I appreciate your time. So any other words of wisdom? Because I think I want to be conscious of your time and everybody else's time.
Yeah, no, I think that I'll go back to one of the comments I made sort of in the middle of the session here is the issue of culture, right? I mean, to create a culture where the organization thinks about revenue impact of their work, a culture where sales and marketing worry less about attribution and impact and scorecards and more about what it takes to together as a cross-functional unit create that body of work that compels prospects to authentically want to engage with them. I think you can build all the best, lead routing structures. You can build SQL, BQL definitions all you want, but if you don't address and improve the culture that is being executed within, you're not going to be able to achieve sustainable, repeatable, predictable results.
Beautiful. Thank you for reminding us, Matt. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again soon.
Sounds good, man. I appreciate this.
Thank you. Cheers. Best wishes.